The Korban Pesach that was brought in Eretz Mitzrayim had a blend of Dinim L'Doris and Haruah Shua. They had a Schachter Korban Pesach, they had to eat the Korban Pesach, and the oral was not allowed to eat the Kol Oral Lo Yochal Bo, Kol Banech Lo Yochal Bo. They had a lot of details that were Haruah Shua. And the Mishnah in Pesachim and the Tosefta comment on which were the Haruah Shua. Chaltem osa b'chipozen, maslechem chagurem, nalechem b'raglechem, akelchem v'yetchem, chaltem osa b'chipozen. This is all Haruah Shua. This is not a din l'doros. The pasuk al yetzi ish me pesach pesach ad boker also is a Haruah Shua. That doesn't apply to Pesach doros. I remember when I was a little boy, my father used to get all the Anglo-Jewish newspapers in the mail. So it used to be one of the newspapers used to be the JWB Circle, Jewish Welfare Board Circle. I don't remember how many times it came out a year. And the middle page always used to be book reviews. So as a little boy before Bar Mitzvah, I used to read the book reviews. Remember when the book came out, The Last of the Just. It's a historical novel, the way what life was like Bisman Bayesheni, supposedly based on Josephus. So some conservative rabbi wrote a book review that is not reliable. The book is not correct because they describe, we spoke about it a couple of months ago, I think. They described the way that people hadn't seen each other. They came, for Aliyah L'Regel, they came from all over the world. They came from all over the world. The Gemara says, strictly speaking, the obligation to do Aliyah L'Regel only applies Mishesh Lo Karka B'Eretz Yisrael. If you don't live in Eretz Yisrael, you're not mechuyev to be Aliyah L'Regel. But the Gemara says people came from all over the world. And so the people hadn't seen each other since Shavuos, and they came Sukkot, and then from Sukkot till Pesach is a half a year. They hadn't seen each other from different countries, different parts of the world. So after they would finish the Seder, they would go visit each other and catch up on all the latest news. So the conservative rabbi writes, they're not going to violate the din of Chumash al Yetzis and Pesach Pesach Boiker. They're not going to go visit. You're not allowed to walk out of your house after you finished eating the Korban Pesach. So as a little boy, I knew that was wrong. That that's only Haruah Shua. That didn't apply to Doros. So the Mishkan also, in the Parshas here, Terumah Tetzava Vayachal Pikud in the Mishkan is a blend of Dinim L'Doros and Haruah Shua. Some of the Dinim apply throughout all the generations. The big Dekuna remain the same. And the different Chalokim of the Beis HaMikdash, you have to have an Azara, and a Herschel, and a Kodesh HaKadoshim, and so on. But the Urios, with the Kroshim, with the Krosim, this is all Haruah Shua. That's not a Din L'Doros. The Gemara says when the Chashmonaim rebelled against the Yevonim or against the Misyavnim, whoever happened to be there, so they had to make a new menorah because the old menorah, apparently everything was used for Avodah Zarah. So they had to make a new mizbech, they had to make a new menorah. So the Gemara has a historical machloikis, which is a halachic machloikis. When they made the new menorah, they had to make it quickly. They had to light the menorah that night when they came in and they won the war. They had to light the menorah that night. So they didn't have time to make a menorah with all the tchotchkes, all the givim, kaftorim, ufrochim. So the Gemara says that din, givim, kaftorim, ufrochim, only applies if the menorah was made from gold. If it's made from anything else, you don't need the givim, kaftorim. So it makes it much easier to make a menorah on the spot. So the Gemara has a machlokes whether the menorah that the Chashmonaim made was from wood, the whole thing was made from wood, or was made from metal. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes in halacha. Is a menorah made from wood acceptable? Because other metals for sure are acceptable. So that the Gemara says it depends how you darshim psukim. Rebbe Akiva, we say in the Siddur, Rebbe Shmuel b'shlosh esamidas atar nidreshes b'hem. That's what Rebbe Shmuel says. Rebbe Akiva had a tradition from Nochem Ish Gamzu. That's what the Gemara says. And Nochem Ish Gamzu had different. It wasn't klal prat to klal. It was ribi miut v'riboy. What's the difference whether it's klal prat to klal or ribi miut v'riboy? If it's called prat to cloud, then it has to be ke'ena prat is good enough. If it's riba mir to riba, you're only might one thing. So the Gemara says if it's riba mir to riba, then you only might cheres is no good. A menorah shel cheres is cheap. That's not bikovadik. But a menorah shel eitz is more bikovadik. That would be good. But if you hold that it has to be klal prat to klal, then ke'ena prat is good enough. So any kind of mateches would be acceptable. So that's a historical machlokes. That's a halachic machlokes. Did they make the menorah? It was easier to make a menorah shel eitz. 1, 2, 3. So if eitz is good, so one Tana claims that the Chashmonai made a menorah shel eitz, that they had a chance to make it shel mateches. And the other Tana says no, shel eitz is not acceptable either. It must have been that it was also shel mateches. There is a question down the block. There's a Beis Chabad. So all the Chabadniks, they all have the symbol of their branch of the Jewish religion is that they have the menorah, because the last Rebbe insisted that the Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnayos, the Rambam has a diagram what the menorah looks like. So it's not curved; it's straight lines like this. So I thought that the printer didn't have any things to print circular lines. I thought that's why the printer put in straight lines. So they say, no, Rabbi Avram ben Rambam says his father held that it was straight. The son said that's what the father held, not the printer's mistake. And others say not so. The Ibn Ezra said it's supposed to be curved, like we usually assume. So that's a shaila. What's the correct shape of the, what is it supposed to be? What's the correct shape of the menorah supposed to be? We have a din in the Hilchah Shabbos. If you have, let's see, you have a cemetery, and you have a wall around the cemetery. It's separated from the rest of the city. And the cemetery is bigger than Beis Hasayim. A Beis Saw is 50 by 50 amas. The Chatzah Mishkan was Beis Hasayim. It was 50 by 100. Twice a Beis Saw. It's called the Beis Hasayim. So having a Beis Hasayim, Shaluhuka Fladira, in the cemetery, nobody lives there. If you have a backyard, a gigantic backyard, you had a fence around it, and the house where you're living in opens up into the backyard. So that's called Hukaf Ladira. You have a base dira there, and you go from the house into the backyard. But if you just have a cemetery on the outskirts of the city, and it's Mukaf Mechitza, and it has no roof, and it's Yosem and Beis Hasayim, so Minator it's a Rishus HaYochid, and Hazorak L'Tocha would be Chayiv Misa if you carry from the Rishus HaRabim into the carpet. The Gemara says you Chayiv Misa. But with the Rabbanan made a Chumrah that if it's Yosem and Beis Hasayim Shaluhuka Fladira, we call it a carpet, and you're not allowed to carry. Why did they make the shear should be Yosem and Beis Hasayim? I was just thinking, I don't remember if Rashi ever says, I thought it's Pashut, that if the Chachamim are going to come up with the Chumrah, it's going to come out that Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, they all violated the Din D'Rabbanan. They violated before it was instituted. When you make a Din D'Rabbanan, it's only Noig Mikan Al Haba. That's the Rosh in the end of the first parak in Chulin. When the Chachamim prohibited Gvina Sakum, so whatever Gvina Sakum was processed before the Gzera D'Rabbanan was mutter. You can't answer ex post facto. They made the cheese before they made the Din D'Rabbanan, and it had a stamp on it's under the Hashgacha of the Tanoim, Rabbi Loza ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva, whatever. And then all of a sudden tomorrow they're going to prohibit Gvina Sakum. So the cheese that was made yesterday on the Hashgacha is going to be declared as straight. So whatever cheeses were made by the Nochim before they made the Gzera D'Rabbanan are mutter. It's only Mikan Al Haba. But still, it's not nice. We're going to aser tilton and a karpif is going to come out that Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen in the midbar, the whole Abayim Shana, they were doing something which the Chachamim generations later prohibited. So that's why the Chacham only asered if it's Yosem and Beis Hasayim Shaluhu Kalutir. If it's Beis Hasayim or less, then they never made the Gzera. Perhaps that's the reason why. So the pasuk has towards the end, at the very end of Parshas Terumah, one of the last psukim in the parsha. Orach hachatze meo bama. It was 100 amos long. V'rochav chamishim, and 100 by 50. But the pasuk doesn't say the pasuk. V'rochav chamishim b'chamishim. It doesn't read straight. It should say orach hachatze was meo. V'rochav was chamishim. So why say chamishim b'chamishim? So Rashi quotes the Gemara has a discussion on that. So one pshat the Gemara says is that the first chamishim b'chamishim, 50 by 50, there was nothing there. The mizbeach hachitzon was after the chamishim, everything was empty, and the mizbeach hanachoshes, mizbeach ha'olah, was after the chamishim. So that's a reference to that. It's really mea by 50, but it says chamishim because the first chamishim, there was none of the klei hamishkan were there. But then the Gemara has another thing, another comment that I would have thought is good for the Balatura maybe. But the Gemara learns out of Din Deraisa from that. That the Chatzah was 50 by 100. Chamishim means you visual. That's I don't understand how this fits in. But it's a Din Deraisa. You visualize the Chatzah, which is 100 by 50. How much is that in square amos? 50 by 100.
5,000.
5,000 square amos. So you visualize that if it would have been a square. Instead of being 100 by 50, how much would it be if it would be a square? It would be 5,000 square. So the Gemara says it would be 70 amos plus. Shiva mama v'shirayim. What's the square root of 5,000?
71.71. 71.71.
71.71. Okay. So the Gemara learns out of Din Deraisa from there.
70.7. So yeah,
Shiva mama v'shirayim. 70 amos plus a little bit. Between 70 and 71. The Gemara learns out of Din Deraisa there. What's a Din Deraisa? If you have the houses near each other, and then the city keeps on expanding, bigger, they keep on building more houses, it gets bigger. So if the houses are within 70 amos to each other, then it's an extension of the city. If you have a wall around the city, so it's all the same city, there's a wall, mechitza makes it all one big city. But if you don't have a wall around it, but you have the houses keep on extending, so if the houses are within Shivim Amma, Vishirayim, then the city is extended. That's in the Gemara. Then there's a Taisus has a comment that there's a Mishnah in Erevin and a Mishnah in Erechin that says the same thing. Erevin and Erechin are totally unrelated to each other. The yeshivas, they make fun of the way Balabatim learn. Balabatim learn very nicely. They learn Daf Yomi. They know them more than a lot of yeshiva guys. They learn Daf Yomi. So in the yeshivas, they make fun that two older gentlemen made up to go to learn B'chavrusa. They were both hard of hearing. So one thought they made up to learn Erevin, the other one thought they made up to learn Erechin. So they were learning away every day together. Everything was fine. Then they got to Daf Lamed Dalet or something. One made us see him. Erechin is very short. Erevin is more than twice as long. When they made us see him, then they realized that they were learning two different Mesichtas. But until then, everything was fine. Yeah. So there's a Mishnah that appears both in Erevin and in Erechin. What's the definition of a city? It's not right. The yeshiva guys make fun of it. In Europe, the yeshiva Bachman used to make fun of Balabatim. Balabatim support the yeshivas. They support the Torah. They deserve a lot of credit. And a lot of time, Balabatim learn more than the yeshiva guys. Especially now that everybody learns Daf Yomi. Yeah. So there's a Mishnah that appears both in Erechin and in Erevin. In Erechin, there's a din of Ir HaMekefes Chaimim V'Yosher Ben Nun. Has different dinim. So what's the definition of an ear? Let's say I have a house and I have a wall around it, and the wall was there in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. That's called an ear. It's not an ear. It's a private house. Private house doesn't have the din of Mukha Chomer Yeshua ben Nun. Only an ear. What's the definition of an ear? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin has a machlokes hatanar regarding irani dachas. What's the minimum population that you have to have? If you don't have a minimum population, it's not called an ear. So the Ravid writes in Hilchos Purim, there used to be a din, akvar makdimim le'yom aknista. If you don't live in an ear, then there was a kula that if Purim fell out on a different day of the week other than Sheni v'Chamishi, Monday and Thursday, there used to be a kula bisman by Sheni that the Bnei Hakfarim could be Magdimim the Yom HaKnisa. We give them a kula, they can be Yotze Mikra Megillah on the Monday or Thursday before Purim. The Gemara says at the time of Churban by Sheni, they discontinued that heter because it's just going to be confusing. People are going to think that a month after Purim is Pesach. They read the Megillah before Purim, so they're going to think that Pesach is 3 days earlier than it really is. So they discontinued that kula of the Bnei Hakfarim Makdimim Liyom. No more Yom HaKnisa. The first daf in Megillah says like that. So the Rabbit writes, what's the definition of a kfarim? What's ir and what's kfarim? So you have to have a minimum population, like the Gemara in the first parak in Sanhedrin regarding ir and idachas. You have to have the minimum population. That's one condition. Then you need another condition. That's in the Mishnah, that both an Erechin and an Erevin. In Erevin, it's about the Tchum Shabbos. If you have a city, so the whole city has one big Tchum. And then if it's a city, so every city, you even though it's sprawling all over the place, you treat every city as if it's a rectangle. So you get more area. There's got to be empty spaces all over the place. So you treat this city, you take the northernmost house in the city and draw a line like this. Then you take the easternmost house in the city, draw a line like that, and so on. And it's going to be a big rectangle. And then you have the Ibura Shalir, 70 amas outside of the city. Then you have Alpayim Amma after the Ibura Shalir. So that's only if it's an ear. But if you just have a bunch of houses, that's not called an ear. So what's the definition of an ear? So you need the minimum population. That's, we pass on 100. Minimum population. By Aaron Hidachas, there's a din. The Chachamim Darshan Lahakel. That's the pasuk. The Hitzila Ho'eda teaches us that whenever you're darshaning psukim with respect to din nefesh, you have to bend over backwards to darshan lahakel, not to punish the people, not to give mises bezin. So by ir and idachas we darshan ir v'lo krach. If it's a big metropolis and it doesn't have a din of ir and idachas, only if it's a city. If it's if it's kfarim, if it's not al pidin a city, then it's not ir and idachas. It has to be an ir, but it shouldn't be a krach. When you get to other dinim, there's no such halacha ir v'lo krach. That's a special kula that you darshan a din nefashas lahakal. Both an erchen and an erevin, when you get to dinim deraisa, dinim derabanan, that in order to be considered an ir, you have to have gimel chatzeris. What's a chatzer? An area that has mechitza around it, mukav mechitza, and there are at least two houses in the area. So the Reuben's family lives in one house, Shimon's family lives in the other house. The rest of the chotzer is used by both of them. B'shutfis, so that's a definition of a chotzer. So you have to have gimel chatzeris. So it never says how close the chatzeris have to be. So Tosis asks, you mean you have one chotzer in New York, one chotzer in Minneapolis, and one chotzer in Los Angeles makes the whole United States of America into one big year. They can be 1,000 miles apart from each other. Not mistaber. They have to be contiguous to each other. Mom is touching. Three chatzeris, not mistaber. So what's the shir? The Gemara never says the shir. So Taisa thinks that this pasuk, rochav chamishim v'chamishim, 100 by 50 is 5,000 square amas. So if you make that into a square, rochav chamishim v'chamishim, you take the area, make it into a square, and then the square root will be 70 point whatever. So more than between 70 and 71. So that's the shear. That's the shear. Just like the bottom have to be within Shivim Amim Shiraim to each other to consider it as if the city is extending further for Tchum Shabbos purposes. So the Chatzeres have to be within Shivim Amim Shiraim to each other to make the whole area into an ear. So this is a real din deraisa. It's I don't see how they you have to have a hush to know how to darshan a pasuk. We had a thesis like that last year. We were learning. So Taisa said, how did they darshan pri gedule karka? How did they know what to darshan? You have a klal prata klal. So he said, Taisa says they had a hush to know how to read in between the lines. The Psukim tell us that there were two mizbachos in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. That's a din l'doros. You have to have a mizbach hazohav. That's a mizbech hapnimi. That's called the mizbach haktoris. Then you have the mizbech hachitzon. It's called the mizbach hanachoshes, and that's the mizbech hachitzon. There's the differences between the two. Mizbech hapnimi is only miyuchad for Torahs every day. The maktik Torahs in the Heichal. And then once a year, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur goes in, he takes a dam apar v'dam asor, he does azos in the Kodesh HaKadoshim in front of the Aron. Then he does Zrikas Adam in the Heichal in front of the Paroiches. And then he does Zrikas Adam on the Mizbech HaPnimi once a year. So the Gemara says the Mizbech HaPnimi was a kli. It was not mechubel karka. The Mizbech HaChitzon was considered binyan. It was mechubel karka. Mizbach Adama Tasalins b'mula ba'adama. It was Mizbach HaNachoshes was a shell of Nachoshes, and it filled it up with offer. So it was mechubel karka. So it was not a kli. Mechubel karka by definition is not a kli. It's binyan. So there's a machlekes hatanoim. How long is an amma? An amma is usually 6 tvachim. A tefach is like this, with the thumb on top, from the top over here to the bottom over here. So we usually assume that an amma is 6 tvachim. So there's a machlekes in the Tanoim. In the Mishnah, where's the Mishnah? In Menachos, I think, the end of Menachos, and it's quoted. The Daf Yomi people know it from Menachos, and the Yeshiva Bachim know it from Sukkah. Beginning of Sukkah, the Gemara has machlekes of Meir Reb Yehuda. Is the sheer tefach? It says the size, everything, how big the shulchan has to be, how big the aron has to be, how many amas, and so on. So when it says about the mizbech hapnim, mizbech hachitzon, how many amas it has to be, are those amas 5 tvachim or 6 tvachim? So one Tana says all the amas are 6 tvachim. The other Tana says a difference between amas shel binyan and amas shel kelim. One is 5 tvachim, one is 6 tvachim. So it's a difference la halacha. Maybe another difference. The Gemara has a din. The Gemara Zvachim has a din. The Mizbach HaKtoris, Sheneka Mimkomo, let's say this is the Mizbach HaKtoris in the Heichal. And it's not mechubel karka, so someone picked the whole thing up, it's heavy. Someone picked it up and they took it away. The Gemara says you can be makta Ktoris Bimkoma on the floor. It's not miyake. Even though the Mizbeach is not there, you're supposed to be makta the Ktoris on top of the Mizbeach. If it's Mizbeach Sheneka Mimkom, Aktirim Ktoris Mimkom. So would that be the same on the Mizbeach HaChitzon also? That if the Mizbeach is not there, the Mizbeach HaChitzon is Memula Ba'adama. So the top of the Mizbeach is considered the ground level. By the Mizbeach HaPnimi, it's a kli. So the ground level is the ground on the bottom. So if you take away the Mizbeach Sheneka Mimkomo, so that's the Mokam HaMizbeach. But by the Mizbeach HaChitzon, it's filled in with Adama. So the top of the Mizbeach was 9 amas tall. Top of the Mizbeach is the ground level. So if you move it away, the Pashtus is you can't be makter anything. You can't be Zorik the Dam. There's no Mizbeach to be Zorik the Dam. You can't be Zorik the Dam. And you can't be makter, let's say, Menochas. Or Emurim. You want to be makter Emurim. You can't be makter Emurim on the Mokam HaMizbeach. There's a Taisus in Zvachim where Taisus thinks you can be makter Menochas, just like Mizbeach HaPnimi. Shenekar Mimkomo, the Mizbach HaKtor, Shenekar Mimkomo, Makter Ktoris Bimkomo, on the floor, so to the Mizbech HaChitzon, Shenekar Mimkomo, you can't be Makter Emurim, that you need a real Mizbech, but you can be Makter Menochas, because that's similar to Ktoris, not from a Balchai. And others are not so convinced that Taisus is right. It made up a new din, Yesh Me'ayin. They think maybe it's not right, and they give different explanation. I thought the reason would be because it's not Mikomo. Because the Mizbech HaChitzon is Mizbach Adama, because it's Mechubel HaKarka. So after you make the Mizbech, the ground level is on top of the Mizbech, not the floor on it. That's all part of the Karka. So if you're going to be Maktam Mikomo, it's not the Mokam. Anyway, that's the Shiloh. There's a pasuk in today's Sedra about how to make them mizbech hapnim. I think nevuv luchos tasa oisai. Nevuv. So the Gemara has an interesting comment that the pasuk says that the luchos, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, so the luchos were engraved mizeh heim ksuvim. There was engraved through and through. So if you looked on one side, it says Anoch Hashem Elokecha. You looked on the other side, everything was engraved through and through. So what did it say on the other side? So a lot of people misquote the Gemara. They thought that it was a miracle on top of a miracle, that you read it on the other side, it also said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. The Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says, on this side it said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, on the other side everything was backwards. All the letters were engraved from the back. So the Gemara gives an example. It said Nevuv on one side, on the other side it said Buban. That's Nevuv backwards is Buban. So Tosfos says, what the Gemara gave the word Nevuv? Nevuv is not on Aseres Adivus. It's at the end of Pasha's Terumah. Nevuv Luchas also Oisam. So Tosfos says, it's a mashal b'alma. It's a mashal. If the Vuv would have appeared, on the other side it would have said Buban. But it's a haladabahu, it's a strange Gemara. So the Beis HaLevi has a long drasha. At the end of the Tshuvas Beis HaLevi are 3 volumes. So at the end of the first volume, they have a few Tshuvas by Rab Chaim Volozhin. At the end of the second volume, because they were descendants from Rab Chaim Volozhin. In Lithuania, that was the big yichus, Beis Harav, the descendants of Rab Chaim Volozhin. The descendants of the Vilna Gaon, for some reason or another, didn't make it. That was not considered a yichus. But the descendants of Rab Chaim Volozhin, that's called Beis Harav. By the Hasidim, they say the reason why is the big yichus Rab Chaim Volozhin? Because they say that Rab Chaim Volozhin, when the Vilna Gaon made a cherem against the Hasidim, and they brought it to all the Talmidim to sign along, so Rab Chaim Volozhin didn't want to sign. He said, if the Rebbe would be here and tell me to sign, I'd sign. The Shliach comes and he tells me I should sign to make a cherem and a Chassidim, a cherem, a curse that they should drop dead. He said, not mechuyev. And he said, that's how they stay all over the story, because when the Rebbe Shalom told Avraham Avinu, Kachnas Pinchas, Chitcha Sha'afta, you should bring Yitzchak as a carbon, the Rebbe Shalom appeared to him in person. When he said, Al Tishlach Yodchal Anar, he sent a malach to tell the guy not to shecht his son, that you listen to the malach. But if the malach comes and tells you should shecht his son, then you have to have the Rebbe Shalom should come in person. That's how they say, Rab Chaim Volozhin said. The one who used to be in charge of Machon Yerushalayim, that's a publishing firm in Yerushalayim, the one who used to be in charge used to be a collector of Kisvei Yad. And he knew how to identify the handwriting of the people. He said he doesn't understand that whole story because he has handwritten letters by Rab Chaim Volozhin. He says the cherem was written by Rab Chaim Volozhin. What do you mean he didn't sign it? He wrote it. It's in his handwriting. He doesn't understand that whole part of the story. So the Beis HaLevi writes, based on passages in the Zohar, and based on this Gemara in the Vuv, on the other side it said Buban, the opposite. So he said, and the Luchas Rishonos, everything was written. And the original plan A was that there isn't going to be any need for any Torah Shabbal Peh. Everything was going to be written on the Luchas. Whenever you have a shali, you look on the Luchas, and the answer will be there. But then, after the Chet HaEgel, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this Tosfos in Gittin, on Daf Nun Tes, I think, quotes this Medrash on the Chet HaEgel. After the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Geyser, Abnei Yisrael, that they should be, originally it was going to be L'chei V'Soilem. The Yotzi Hashem, L'chei V'Soilem, we were never going to be Meshubed to the Ummah Soilem again. But Yisrael were going to be free L'chei V'Soilem. After Yitzias Mitzrayim. But after the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Geyser that the Jewish people would have to suffer at the hands of the Goyim. And they'll be sholet on the Jews. So they'll be sholet on the Torah also. So the Ummah Soilem will be able to claim that they are the real Jews. That's what the Catholics have been claiming from day number one. They claim that the Jews rejected Osa Ho'ish, so we lost our status as the Am HaNivcha, and they are now the Am HaNivcha. But the Am HaNivcha has to have the Torah. So they have the Torah. They have Shlit over the Torah. So plan B was, in case after the Chet Egel, and the Umm will have Shlita on the Jewish people, will have Shlita on the Torah. They'll claim that they are the Am Hanifcha, which they have been claiming all the years. The plain way was going to be that there's going to be a Torah Shabbal Peh, and that's going to be unique to the Jewish people. Only Klal Yisrael is going to have the Torah Shabbal Peh. The Ummah Ha'olam are not allowed to learn Torah. They're only, the Gemara says, more comes on the Pasuk. Torah Tziva Lana Moshe, Marosha Kehilas Yaakov, Atika Merosha Elam Urasa. That if a Nachri learns Torah, it's like Ibala ala Naira Hamarasa. The Torah belongs to the Jewish people. So the Gemara says Sheva mitzvahs the two they're permitted to learn, but anything other than the Sheva mitzvahs they're not allowed to learn. And even the Sheva mitzvahs, we're not allowed to teach them the Torah Shabbal Peh on the Sheva mitzvahs. That's supposed to be miyuchad for the Jewish people. And that's a pasuk in Novi that the Gemara in Gittin quotes, that the Medrash elaborates upon. The Gemara has a machlokes in Gittin, in Perek HaNizaken, whether Rav Torah is Bichsav or Rav Torah is Bal Peh. Machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer was a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan was the first generation of Amoraim, Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And Rish Lakish was a gangster who became a Baal Tshuva, became a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. He married Rabbi Yechanan's sister. And he often disagreed. Rish Lakish often disagreed. So Rabbi Lozer was a Talmud. Rabbi Lozer was a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Lozer disagrees with Rabbi Yechanan regarding this issue, whether Rav Torah is Bichsav or Rav Torah is Bal Peh. So the Gemara quotes a pasuk from Navi, Echtav Dalrubei Torasi Alok Mozar Nechshavu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if I'll have rov of the Torah will be Bichsav, then the Jewish people will be pushed away. The Christians, the Catholics will say that they are the Am Hanifcha. They are the Am Hanifcha, and they have the whole Torah. If Rav HaTorah will be Biksav, so that's why Rav HaTorah has to be Bal Peh, and that's unique to the Jewish people. We have to be careful not to share that with the Ummah Ha'olam. Not supposed to share the Torah Shabbal Peh with the Ummah Ha'olam. That's what we saw the other day. On the President's Day, we saw the Gemara, the end of Ksubas. So the Gemara says the Sholosh Shavuos pasuk appears 3 times. But then all 3 times it says Im Tiru Toeru. So the Gemara says there are 6 Shavuos. So one of the 6 Shavuos is some of the Shavuos are for the Ummah Ha'olam, some of the Shavuos are for Bnei Yisrael. So the Shavuot for Bnei Yisrael Shelo Legalo says Hasod. What's Sod? So one pshat in Rashi tells was Sod Ho'ibur. Sod Ho'ibur is the physics and mathematics. What do you mean Shelo Legalo Sod Ho'ibur? The Goyim know that better than us, about how to calculate the moldus and the tkufis and so on. It's just plain a little physics and a lot of mathematics. Not so complicated. So the pashta is the other pshat in Rashi, the sod of the Torah Shabbal Peh. The sod of the Torah. We're not supposed to reveal the Torah Shabbal Peh to the Ummah Ha'olam. Unfortunately, when they translated the Gemara into Yiddish, so the Goyim didn't read Yiddish. But now they translated the Gemara into English, so that the Vatican, they have the Galochma sitting and learning the Art Scroll. So that is a big problem. So that's what the Beis HaLevi says. The original plan was that Kol HaTorah Kula, even the Vuv Luchos, which is in Parshas Terumah, everything was written on Aseret Adibros. Then Moshe Rabbeinu smashed the Luchos when he saw the Bnei Yisrael dancing around the Egel. And he had to have a new set of Luchos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, when Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Avodah Zarah, he saw the Egel. So the Medrash says he looked at the Luchos and he saw Osias Parchas Ba'avir. All the Osias, and that's everything flew out, and then he smashed the Luchos. So when the Osias were Parchas Ba'avir, so everything got filled in with stone. So it was so heavy. If you have, let's say, this is one of the luchos, so you have carved out, it's a lot of empty spaces. But then at Osias Perchas Bavir, nothing is missing. So everything is heavy stone. So he couldn't carry it. So one opinion, the Beis Halevi showed that's a machlokes satanoim. So just like you have a machlokes with Eidich Simakar, Eidich Mesira Karsi, you have machlokes about a lot of things in the Gemara. You have a machlokes on Agadata also. What happened with the luchas? So one sheet is he dropped the luchas. Not that he threw it on purpose. He dropped it. It was so heavy because the osios with Perchas Bavir. And the other sheet is no, that he smashed it. So the Beis Halevi says, first, the rest of the osios were Perchas Bavir, and the only thing that was left was Aseres Adibros. That was still engraved. And then Rosh Hashanah smashed that. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will engrave I will engrave now only the Aseres Adibros that remain after the osios of Nevuv, after the rest of the osios for Perchas Bavir. So the only thing that was left was the Aseres Adibros. So the second luchos only had the Aseres Adibros on it. And the rest, everything else was Torah Shebal Peh. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Alei Elai HaHor Ben Luchos Luchos Eben HaTorah HaMitzvah. He's going to give him the rest, Big Sav, the rest of the Chumshei Torah. But there was a lot of Torah Shebal Peh. So the beginning of the Torah Shebal Peh was with the Shviras HaLuchos. They had to do Plan B. Then only Aseres Adibros would be written later in the Chumshei Torah. It's going to be the rive of the Torah is going to be Torah Shebal Peh.
Rabbi, so what does it mean that the Bnei Yisrael were Mikabel Torah Shebal Peh, they were Mikabel by Purim, if the whole idea is that there was never Torah Shebal Peh to begin with, only after the Shviras.
They didn't want to be Mikabel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu forced it on them. And then on the occasion of Purim, they're Mikabel Berotzen, Hori Kiblu Berotzen. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu forced it on the Torah Shebal Peh. That's how the Gemara says, yeah. During the Baisheni period, they used to have every week, there was another Yontif. And this was all written down. This is called Megillas Tainis. Called Megillas Tainis because it has a list of all the holidays when you're not allowed to have Tainis, Hesped and Tainis. It's a Yontif. It's a Yontif. You don't have a Chiyuv to have a Suda. There's no Simcha B'Kumbi. I say, but it's a Mei Simcha B'Shei Al Tasa that you're not allowed to have Hesped and Tainis. We pointed out the other day that the Mechaber writes in Hilchas Rish Chodesh that it would appear from the Rambam that the Yisa Hesped V'Tainis on Rish Chodesh is the Raisa. That's called the Tikkun Rabbanan came, the Raisa Tikkun. The Chachamim had all these Yamim Tovim on Megillas Tainis, between 20 and 30 Yamim Tovim, and they all have an Yisa Hesped V'Tainis. So that's patterned after Rish Chodesh, that there's no Chiyuv Simcha B'Kum B'Aseh, but there's a Chiyuv Simcha B'Shei Al Tas. And that's the Gemara has a suffix. When one forgot to say Yalav and Birchas Hamazon on Rish Chodesh, and he reminds himself before he starts at Tova Meitiv, if he reminds himself before Tova Meitiv, then he says special bracha. So the Gemara gives you the text of the bracha. Baruch Shenas and Rosh Chodashim Lama Yisrael. And then the Gemara has a suffix whether you say L'Simcha or not. Why? Because there is a Chiyuv Simcha, but it's only B'Shei V'Al Tasser. It's not B'Kum V'Yaseh. That's a suffix, whether it makes sense to mention the Simcha or not, so we leave it out. We don't say it. So the Gemara in Masechus Rosh Hashanah has a whole back Gemara. What is the common denominator between all of these holidays of Megillas Tainis? What do they all have in common? That the Chachamim had the right to make a Yontif. It's not a violation of Bal Tosef, adding on to the Yamim Tovim in the Chumash. So the Chassam Sofer has a tshuva where he writes regarding Lag BaOmer. He heard that in Eretz Yisrael, all over the world on Lag BaOmer, it says in Shulchan Aruch, you delete Tachnun, you leave out Tachnun. So that didn't bother him. What right do you have to make a Yontif on Lag BaOmer? Who made it into a Yontif? But he heard that in Eretz Yisrael they have bonfires and have dancing and singing, and they give the children chalaka, they give them the haircut, the first haircut, when they're 3 years old. He thought that that's a violation. You're making it into a Yontif, and it doesn't conform to the rules and regulations of Megillas Tainis, so that should be a violation of Bal Tosef. That's what he quotes from the Pri Chodesh. The Pri Chodesh says that if you're going to make a new Yontif, not in accordance with the rules and regulations of Megillah Steiners, that would be a violation of Baltes. So he writes, about line. If I would have authority, if they would listen to me, I would be mevatel of what they have in their own. That they shouldn't celebrate Lag Baimer like that. Leaving out Tachnan Nishgefela, because we assume, like the Goinim, that Tachnan is only Rishus. The Rama's opinion is that Tachnan is an obligation. You have to say Tachnan, except for Shabbos and Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, when you're not allowed to say, but otherwise you have to. So we don't follow that opinion because we delete Tachnan on Lag Baimer. There's no good reason. We leave out Tachnan on Tu B'Shvat. There's no good reason why you leave out Tachnan on Tu B'Shvat. There's no simcha. Tu B'Shvat, you're permitted to say a hesped. The Rebbe Yehuda has a hesped that he delivered on Tu B'Shvat and printed it in his Drusha Hatzlach. I delivered a hesped once on Tu B'Shvat. Yeah. Tu B'Shvat is not a Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, what are the rules and regulations of Megillah Tainus? So the Gemara says, the common denominator of all the Yom Tov is everything revolves about the Beit HaMikdash. Whenever the Hashmonaim were victorious in battle, there was a Beit HaMikdash, and if they wouldn't be victorious, the enemy would either destroy the Beit HaMikdash or defile it, use it for Avodah Zarah purposes. Like the Hashmonaim came, everything was used for Avodah Zarah. They had to make a new menorah, they had to make a new mizbech. Everything was nipsal, it was used for Avodah Zarah. So whenever the Hashmonaim, whenever Tzahal is victorious, you have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to have a Suda Soidah, you have to do something. But you don't make a Yontif. There's no Beis HaMikdash. But when you complete the binyan of the Beis HaMikdash, that's a din men HaTorah, the Ramban, and his commentary on Chumash, as well as the commentary on the Sefer HaMitzvahs, repeats it. He says he thinks that's one of the Taryag mitzvahs. One of the Ramach mitzvahs essay, to celebrate when you complete the building of the Beis HaMikdash. How many we haven't completed so many Bate Mikdoshin? So the Galya Masechta is a Tshuva Sefer. David al-Navardiker, he was a contemporary of Rab Chaim Alozhan. He gave a hesped. He printed the hesped, Rab Chaim Alozhan there. At a time, there was a period of time that he was upset about Rab Chaim Alozhan. He thought that he ba'aveled him. Then after years, he realized that Rab Chaim Alozhan did not ba'avel him, and he gave a very moving hesped when he passed away. So he has in the Chelek HaDrush, in the second half of the Tshuva Sefer Galya Masechta, they quote him in the Pischei Tshuva every so often. So then in the second half, he thinks that according to those Rishonim who think that Bati Kanasias and Bati Midrashas are all Migdash Me'at, the Navi, the Herschel Navi says it's going to be a Churban Bayis Rishon, and the Jews will be sent into Golus. And even though they won't have the real Beis HaMikdash, they'll have a miniature Beis HaMikdash. What is the miniature Beis HaMikdash? So the Gemara says it refers to Batim Kansias, Batim Midrash Shebe Bavel. So that's a machlokes harishonim. Is that really true? That all the Batim Kansias have Kedusha min HaTorah? It's a Mikdash Meyad, or is that only an Asmachta Midirabbanim? So many Rishonim say it's only an Asmachta. They run on the ribs, so it's only an Asmachta Midirabbanim. All Kedusha is based on Knesset, it's only Kedusha based on Midah. The whole thing is only Midirabbanim. And the Chayodim quotes that Reb Lezer Mimitz and the Sefer Yireim disagrees. And the later Achronim point out that in the Rambam in the Minyan HaMitzvahs B'Ktsara, the Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs as an introduction to the Mishnah Torah. And then the Sefer HaMitzvah was written in Arabic, and then the beginning of the Mishnah Torah has the Minyan HaMitzvahs B'Ktsara, that's in Hebrew. That was written by the Rambam himself. So when he has the din of Losasan Kein Lashem Elokechem, says when you come to Eretz Yisrael, you find a lot of churches with Avodah Zarah. So it says, "V'nitatztem es bezilchosam, v'shibartem es matzevosam, asherem tisur from reish, sila lahem tigadeon, losasan kein Lashem Elokechem." You're not allowed to do that. So the Rambam writes in the Minyan HaMitzvah B'Ktsara, Azor l'notet tzevim min hamizbeach, or miboti g'nesias and miboti midrashas. So he puts it in the Minyan HaMitzvah B'Ktsara. So obviously he thinks that that's a din deraisa. So the Rambam sounds like an old Rav Soloveitcher used to mention that Rambam. The Achronim quoted. The Rambam sounds like he thinks like Reb Lezer Mimitza. Kedusha is Beis HaKnesset and Beis HaMedrash is a Kedusha Deraisa. So the Gali Masechta thinks that just like the Ramban writes, when you complete the building of the Beis HaMikdash, there's a mitzvah in Torah to celebrate. How many days you're going to celebrate, and how many chazonim, with how many members in the choir should you sing, and which rabbi should give a shiur on which topic, for how long, for how many hours should he give a shiur. So that's, the details are hayru ashur, that you have to work out in every generation. But he says, in principle, the Rambam says you have to celebrate when you complete build the Beis HaMikdash. He thinks that that's one of the Taryag mitzvahs deraisa. So that seems to be the basis of the all the Yom Tovim HaMegillas Tainis. In the Chumash it says you have to celebrate Shivas Yimei HaMilum, you have to celebrate. So the Chachamim said not only is there a chiyuv to celebrate when you complete the building of the Beis HaMikdash, if you save the Beis HaMikdash from defilement or from destruction, or some made a major donation for the Beis HaMikdash and it's beautified, or you improve the institutions of the Beis HaMikdash. For many years in the Beis Sheni, the Kohanim who were running the show in the Beis HaMikdash were from the Tzdukim, and they were bringing the Karbonos in properly, and the people were not Yotze. So the Gemara says, he took him to Midah, when the Korban Tovin was established properly, and they wouldn't allow individual people to pay for the Korban Tovin. Under the Tzdukim, they allowed families to donate and hang up a sign. All the Karbonos this year were paid for by the Goldberg family from South Africa. And that's against the din. It has to be purchased from Machzah Shekel money. You're not Yotze. A Korban Sibra, you're not Yotze if it's paid for by private money. So when the Chachamim succeeded in straightening out that issue, it took Chagad Shavuaya, when the Tzdukim were running the show in the Beis HaMikdash, Shavuos was always on a Sunday. And that's the carryover that the Catholics have, that they celebrate. What by us would be Shavuos, by them it's the holiday of the 50th day, always on a Sunday. That they picked up from the Tzdukim, that Shavuos is always on a Sunday. So all of the Yom Tovim Megillas Tainis all revolve about the Beis HaMikdash, improving things and saving from destruction and so on. And the Gemara has a brisa, and the brisa sounds like they instituted a yontif at the time of the seven, after the Churban Beis Sheni. Instituting on the Gemara says, how can it be? If there's no Beis HaMikdash, what are you celebrating? The Gemara says, you have it wrong. That story happened Mizman Beis Sheni. It wasn't after the Churban Abba, it's during the Mizman Beis Sheni. So that's what all the Achronim ask Kasha, the Shagasaria, in his Sefer Turei Even HaMegillah asked, how did they have the right in the first place to institute the Yom Tov Purim? There was no Beis HaMikdash, and the Gemara says, Madach, the Yom Tovim that were instituted Mizman Beis Sheni, when the Beis Sheni was Charib, they no longer observed. So a Yom Tov that comes up after the, you want to celebrate something after the Churban Beis Sheni, there's no Beis HaMikdash at all. So you certainly don't have a right to establish such a Yom Tov. So that's the kasha. How do they have the right to establish the Yom Tov Purim? There wasn't a Beis HaMikdash. So what are they celebrating about? It should be a violation of Bal Tosef. So the Nesivis has fantastic svarim. On Yeredeya, everybody uses the Chavaz Das, Chayshim but everybody uses the Nesivis, and Hilchos Pesach. And the Derech HaChaim Siddur. He has Piskei Halacha and Derech HaChaim, Mishnah Berurah quotes him on every page, Derech HaChaim Siddur. So he has a commentary on Megillah Esther, where it's called Megillah Storm. It's printed in the regular Mikros Gedolos Chumash. So towards the end of the Megillah, to the very end, I think the 8th chapter, 9th chapter, something to the end, he raises the issue. And he says the Chachamim at that time felt that this was going to be the Aschalta de Gula. This is going to lead towards the building of the Beis HaMikdash. That's why they felt that they had a right to institute a Yom Tov. If it's an Aschalta de Gula, so Gula means Binyan Beis HaMikdash, and Aschalta de Gula means something that's going to lead to the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Then the Nesivus points out, the Gemara says originally when they established the Yom Tov Purim, originally it's called Yom Tov. So the Gemara says originally it had an Isa Melocha. Then later on they took away the Isa Melocha. What happened over there? So the Nesivus in his commentary on the Megillah interprets on Psukim that they thought it was going to lead up to the building of the Beit HaMikdash, so they thought they had a right to make a fully blown yontif, and they made a yontif with Isa Malacha, and then they realized that they made a mistake, that it's not going to lead up to Binyan Beit HaMikdash, so they did away with the Isa Malacha. It's a difficult pshat. None of the Yom Tovim and Megillah Steins have an Isa Malacha. And it would have been an Isser, a Balta Isser, to establish a Yontif, even without an Isser Malacha. So that's a difficult idea, what the Mesiva says. But one thing you see, they didn't have Ruach HaKodesh when they thought that according to the Mesiva, they didn't have Ruach HaKodesh. They thought this is going to lead up to the building, and it was wrong. It didn't lead up to it. So you see that you don't have to have Nevi'im, you don't have to have Bali Ruach HaKodesh. If the Chachamim think it's going to lead up to Binyan Beis HaMikdash, you have a right to make a yontif. If it turns out that you're wrong, so you'll abolish the yontif. You don't need the psak to come from Nevi'im, who know Baruch HaKodesh that it's going to be so. So the Pashta says that it wasn't a mistake, that it wasn't Aschalta de Gula. In what way? So one, it could be the Chachamim felt it was a tragedy. This nice religious girl who went to Beis Yankov, Esther, a nice tzniusdik girl. She was living with a guy. She was living with a guy, Achashverosh. We read the Megillah in an hour, so you think the whole story was over in an hour. It wasn't over in an hour. She was living with the guy forever, till he dropped dead. And she had children. All the children were goyim gemum. They were Jewish, al pi din, but they were not brought up with any Jewish education. So in Nehemiah, it says that Nehemiah was the butler for the king, and he served the king breakfast in bed, and he had a sad face. And the king asks him, "Mado panacha roim hayom? Why do you look so sad?" So Nehemiah tells him, he gives a krecht, a Jewish krecht, someone just came from Yerushalayim, and they said how sad the situation is there, that they don't let him build up the walls of Yerushalayim, they don't let him continue to build the Beis HaMikdash. So, and the Pasuk says, when he served breakfast in bed to the king, the Shegel Yosheves Etzla, the woman was there. But it doesn't mention anything about the woman in the story. So what's the significance? Who was the woman? His girlfriend, the queen. Who was the woman? Doesn't say. So the Malbim in his commentary on Tanakh, Malbim on Nehemiah, says he thinks the Shegel was Esther Hamalka. And when Nehemiah gave a krechts, and he said they don't, the king, Artaxerxes was the son of Esther Hamalka. That's the first Rashi and Nehemiah. Artaxerxes his mother was Jewish, his father was Nochri, his father was Achashverosh. His mother was Jewish, he was Jewish. And the Gemara says for the first years of his kingdom, it meant something to him, that he's Jewish and he's the king over Eretz Yisrael. He was king over Sheva V'Yesem and Me'er Medina. He arched in the 127 countries from his father. So for the first years of his life, he felt proud of the fact he's the Jewish king ruling over Eretz Yisrael. He's Jewish because his mother is Jewish. And then after Esther Malka died, and he never got any Jewish education, so he became like a goy gomer, nothing meant. So the Gemara calls it la'acha shehechmet, after he became sour. He didn't mean anything to him. He became completely secular. Mother passed away, never had any Torah education. So then the Tanakh considers his government Malchus U'Masa'olam. What's the difference? So the Gemara says, the first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, the Malchus Yisrael, Rosh Hashanah the Malchus Yisrael is Zechad B'Nissen. Rosh Hashanah the Malchus U'Masa'olam is Zechad B'Tishrei. So in Tanakh there is theories about Artaxerxes. So the early years they treat him like a Melech from Malchus Yisrael. that it's considered a new year when it comes Echad B'Nissen. And in the later years of his kingdom, he treated him like a Malchi U'Masoilum. Then when it comes Tisha, Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah, New Year. The more explains the contradictions in the psukim like that. The Nitziv, in his commentary on Chumash, explains why. The Ran on the Rif, on the first daf in Rosh Hashanah, says he thinks that this is a halacha. It's not just that was the practice, that was the minig, that by Malchei Yisrael, Echad B'Nissen was counted as Rosh Hashanah, but Malchei U'Masoilum, Echad B'Tishrei. He thinks that it's al pidin. Jewish history is all l'mayla min hateva. So there's a hanhaga Nissen in the month of Nisim, Nissen Nigalo, Nissen Asidim Lehigoel. So that's why all of Jewish history is l'mayla min hateva. So that's why Echad B'Nissen is Rosh Hashanah l'Malchei Yisrael. For all Jewish history is l'mayla min hateva. That the Ramban al Chumash has like that there's a whole sugya in the end of Masech Shabbos, Ein Mazal Yisrael. Does mean the Jewish people are not lucky, Jews are unlucky. The word Mazal means you can look into the Kachavim and Mazalas and predict what's going to be in the future. So by the U'Masoilum, you can predict the rules and regulation of how history goes. If the situation is like this, you can predict what's going to be in another 50 years. But by Jewish people, you can't predict. It's if the Jewish people observe the mitzvahs, everything will be le'ela le'ela. If they do averos, it'll be lamata lamata. It doesn't conform to the rules and regulations. I remember when I was in high school, in MTA down the block. So there was a required reading. We had to read an essay by some politician. Somebody in politics, I forgot already the name, who predicted when the Japanese will decide that they've had it after the First World War, that they had it and they'll attack the American army. So he predicted it's going to happen, how many years it's going to take till they'll get fed up with the American army being there. And he explains why they're going to attack the American army on a Sunday morning in December. That's when they attacked on Pearl Harbor, Sunday morning in December. Because in December, the nights are longest, and the Japanese are known for surprise attacks. And Motzoi Shabbos, the Jewish soldier, on Saturday night, I shouldn't call it Motzoi, on Saturday night, the Goyish soldiers in the army get drunk, and they have a hangover on Sunday morning, and they sleep longer. They don't wake up Sunday morning the same as all week long. So the best time to have a surprise attack is in December, because the nights are longest, and the best day of the week is a Sunday morning, because they have the hangover, so it's longer than any other night. So that's exactly. And then he guessed how many years it would take. That's exactly what happened. Not that they read his essay and they followed his recommendation. They didn't read his essay. He knew how to predict history. If you know all the facts now, you can predict. But by Jewish history, the Malam and Ateva. So the Ramban says that's one of the Ikori HaAmunah in the Ramban al Atur. He says, "Ei Mazal Yisrael," that Jewish history is Malam and Ateva. That's one of the Ikori HaAmunah. Everything by the Jewish people, Malam and Ateva. So that's what the Nitziv explains. The Rosh Hashanah, the Malchei Yisrael, Jewish history, the year begins with Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Chodesh of Nisan, Alamaylam and Ateva. But world history, Rosh Hashanah, U'Masoilum, it's Echad B'Tishrei. When the Baruch Shem created the world, he established rules and regulations for mathematics and physics and chemistry and biology and so on. And he established rules and regulations for history. If you have this given all the information, you can predict what's going to happen. Another 60 years, it's going to develop. History repeats itself. The Jewish history is l'mayla min hateva. A lot of people send out wedding invitations or bar mitzvah invitations, and they write how many years it is since Hakamas HaMedina. So they usually change the number of years from He'i around. That's a mistake. They should change it from Rosh Chodesh Nisan on. If the bar mitzvah, the wedding, is after Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it's already the next year. Shouldn't wait till a month later, till He'i year. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Ran on the first half thinks that that's the real din. That's a real din. It's not just a minig that they have. So that's a question. How did they have the right to establish the yontif of Purim in the first place? There was no Beis Hamikdash. So the Nesiva says that they thought that it's going to be Aschalta Degula. It's going to lead up to the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Why they think so? So the way the Malbim suggest, because Artaxshasta was the son of Esther, and his mother was Jewish, and that's what happened when Nehemiah had a sad face. And Artaxshasta asked, what do you look so sad for? So then the mother was there, and the Malbim is reconstructing. He thinks, so the mother said to him, Kindbeine, I'm Jewish, you're Jewish, we're all Jewish, you have to pay for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. So the Pasuk doesn't explain. Pasuk just says, Nehemiah looked sad. So the king said, okay, he gives him a blank check. He gives him as much money as he needs, and as much oil and wine and flour, whatever you need, and then go rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So the Malbim thinks that his mother must have convinced him. So that's one way to explain it. But another way to explain why they thought that it's Hatzchalta de Gula. That's questionable. That is only Hatzchalta de Gula. It's going to lead to the Binyan Baisheni. But Baisheni is Chorev. So what if we still continue? The Gemara said, all the Yamatoyim and Megillah Steinis were Botlu at the time. There was a big machlekes Hatanoim, and Amaroim is going on for years and years and years. Well, all the Yamatoyim and Megillah Steinis that were introduced during this Man Baisheni, do they still continue to be observed after the Churban Baisheni or not? So finally, the psak was that the only two that is still observed are Chanukah and Purim. So Chanukah, we understand why. Because in Chagai is Chari Malachi, with the three Nevi'im in the beginning of Baisheni. So Chagai had a nevuah that God liya kvod habayis hazeh ha'achar min harishon, that this second Beis Hamikdash is going to lead to the third Beis Hamikdash, and that's going to outshine the glory of the first Beis Hamikdash. So Chanukah, the Nes Chanukah, indicated not only that there's a Shechina present now that's hidden. It wasn't a Gilu Shechina. Not only there's a Shechina now, it indicated that the Nevuah of Chagai was true. Chagai said in advance, a big Nes is going to occur in the Bain Sheni, which will show that there is a Hashuas HaShechina here. And it also shows there's going to be a Binyan Bai Shlishi, which is going to outshine the glory of the Bais Rishon. So Chanukah, we understand why we still continue to celebrate after the Churban Bais Sheni, because it had to do with the Bais HaShlishi also. But why do we celebrate Purim? So it could be that the Nes Purim had to do with the Bais HaShlishi as well. I remember once I spoke out of town, so the title of the shir was going to be the story of Purim and the third Beis HaMikdash. So some person thought that it was the other Rabbi Herschel Schachter. They said, what does he know about the third Beis HaMikdash? It probably means the White House. They thought that the third Beis HaMikdash was a euphemism for the White House. I'm going to speak politics. Then when I showed up, I was the wrong person. They were saddened to see the wrong person and the wrong talk. I spoke about the Bais HaShlishi. So the Navi Yirmiyah also says, B'nevuah, all the Nevi'im was saying that the Bais Rishon is going to be destroyed because the people were doing Averis. And the Navi Yirmiyah says, I gave you the Torah, and because you accepted the Torah, I gave you Eretz Yisrael. But now you're not observing the Torah, so you have no right to live in Eretz Yisrael. I was going to send everybody into Golus. There's going to be another Kabbalah Satorah, and this time it will be engraved on your hearts. That's the Lashon and Yirmiyah. It'll be engraved on. You won't be able to reject it. It'll be part of you. So it's assumed to be referring to Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Shebechsav is a text, so you subscribe to the text. Then you don't observe the text. So you don't have the Torah Shebechsav. You're not observing. But the Torah Sheba'al Peh, we think it's in our minds, there is no text, something chutz from us. It's part of our being, Torah Sheba'al Peh. So that Kabbalah Satorah, Kima v'Kiblu, Kima Mashi Kiblu Kfar, there was a new Kabbalah Satorah in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's what enabled the Jewish people They come back to Eretz Yisrael the second time and the third time. The third time. The Hakamas Hamdina in 1948. That was all because of the second Kabbalah Satara. So that the Nes Purim and the Kabbalah Satara and the occasion of the Nes Purim is what's going to lead to the Binyan Bayis HaShlishi. So that's why it's an Aschalta Gula. Not just it's going to lead to the Binyan Bayis Sheni. Lead to the Binyan Bayis Sheni after Churban Bayis Sheni should be bottled like all the other Yom Tov. The answer is no, it's going to lead to the Binyan Bayis HaShlishi as well. So it could be that this is what Purim is all about. It's an Aschalta Gula. When you establish a Medina in Eretz Yisrael, so the Gemara says, Gimel mitzvahs and stavi yisodich nisasim la'aretz, the Jewish people have to observe 3 mitzvahs in a specific order. First is la'amid lahamelech, to establish a Jewish government over all of Eretz Yisrael. That's Hakamas HaMedina. Then you have la'achriz zachar shel Amalek. You have to, every country has a government, has to have a standing army to protect the people. So then the Jewish army has to wipe out Amalek. We assume that did not yet take place. After Amalek will be wiped out, then we're going to pronounce Yud Kei Vav Kei. We still don't pronounce Yud Kei Vav Kei. We assume Amalek was not yet wiped out. So that's the Seder Hadvarim, the Gemara in second Perek and Sanhedrin. And the Rambam quotes in the beginning of Hilchos Malachim, Gimel mitzvahs. We saw the first mitzvahs to establish a Jewish government in Eretz Yisrael. It's not enough that we live in Eretz Yisrael. You have to have a Jewish government controlling all of Eretz Yisrael. Jewish government has to have a standing army. The army has to wipe out Amalek. And then when it'll be peaceful in Eretz Yisrael, Amalek is no longer giving us a hard time, then live in this land based Abchira. So that's an Aschalta de Geula. Livnus Beis HaBchira is the Geula. That's a definition of Geula. When you have a Beis HaMikdash. B'Nissen Nigelu, B'Nissen Asin Ligol means the Mishkan was completed in Nissen. I don't think it goes on Yitzias Mitzrayim. I think it goes on the Binyan HaMishkan. A year after Yitzias Mitzrayim. B'Nissen Nigelu, they built the Mishkan, was completed in Nissen. B'Nissen Asin Ligol, the Bayis HaShlishi will be completed in Nissen. That's psukim in the end of Yecheskel. It says that L'Asid Lavoi, when the Bayis HaShlishi will be built, it doesn't say which year. It just says they'll start bringing Korbanos on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It doesn't say which year. It says Rosh Chodesh Nisan they'll start. So that's B'Nisan Asidim Lehiguel. So Aschalta de Gula means something that's going to lead towards building of the Bayis HaShlishi. The Gula means the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Aschalta de Gula means something that's going to lead to it. So Al Pidin, Hakamas HaMedina, unless one can visualize that the Medina will collapse, and then they'll have to establish it all over again. So the Chachamim, the Ramban HaChomish quotes Midrashim. Ramban has a Sefer HaGu'ula, one of the little kuntresim by the Ramban. It's called Sefer HaGu'ula. It's in the Kol Kisvi HaRamban. So he shows from Midrashim and from Psukim and Tanakh that when the Jewish government will be rebuilt again, when the Medina will be built again, Rabbi Kiva thought that Bar Kokhba was going to be the Melech HaMashiach. And it turned out that was a mistake. It was an attempted rebellion against the Roman government. But he didn't. He was minting coins. He was acting as if he's a government. But the whole thing was a mistake. It wasn't. It didn't last. It was an Eiffel. It didn't last. But Medinas Yisrael is around already since 1948. It's a long time. So it's hard to say that the whole thing was just a mistake. So you have the Ramban insists, based on all the midrashim and psukim and Navi, that once you have a Medina, it's not gonna disappear. So then the Medina is Aschalta Gula. Hakamas Medina is going to lead towards the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's what the Nesiva says. That's what the Sfas Emes has like that. They all Achraim say like that. Why do they have the right to establish a Yontiv in the first place if there was no Beis HaMikdash? Because they felt it's going to lead to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, going to lead to the building by Sheni, going to lead to the building of the Bayis HaShlishi as well. So that's what Purim is supposed to be, a serious holiday. The way people observe Purim is like the Jewish Halloween. They dress up and they do crazy things. Men dress up like women. Women dress up like men. They dress up like goyim. But because everything on Purim was a nes nista, everything was nista. So they dress up. Everything should be behesta. But we should have it. B'nai Torah should observe Purim as Shavuos, Yom Shenitna B'Torah. From all the Yom Tovim in the Megillah Stein is the only one that has a mitzvah of a Suda is Purim. So that's a question that the Taz raises. How come there's a difference between the Chanukah and Purim? Purim, there's a Chiyuv Suda. So the Talmud gives an answer, but that's not the answer that it says in the Gemara. The Goyim had the Girsa in the Gemara. The Gemara says on Shavuos, you have to have elaborate meals because Yom Shenitna B'Torah. The Torah gives us the ability to combine Ruchnias with Gashmias. We eat matzah, we eat Korban Pesach, we do things of Gashma, you eat Shalashudas on Shabbos, you eat food. Eating food becomes a mitzvah. By the Ummah Salam, they don't have such a thing. The Jewish people have a korban shlamim. You can eat the shlamim. By the Nachum, they bring a korban oila. They can't eat the korban shlamim. The Nachum, even a Gershon Izgar, can't eat shlamim till he brings the oila sager, till he brings the korban hager. So in Parshas Yisro, it says that Yisro came, he converted, became Jewish, so he brought oilus of shlamim. Then at the end of the Seder, it says after Maimon HaSinai, they brought oilus of shlamim. Once they were Jewish, they can bring shlamim and eat the shlamim. Nochrim can't eat shlamim. They have an oil, concept of ruchnius, separate from gashmius. So that's the Girsas Hagonim in the Gemara, that Shavuos is Yom Shendit Matara, all the Tanoim agree, you have to have elaborate meals. And on Purim also, it says, Lasset my Mishnah v'simcha. Why? Because Purim was also Kabbalah Sator, the same as Shavuos. Purim was the second Kabbalah Sator, the Kabbalah of the Torah Shabbal Peh. Okay.